Hello everyone. Today we will discuss Edward Said's Orientalism. The Orient, what we call the Middle East, Asia, and North Africa, is not a natural fact. The Orient is a European invention. Syed is not denying that people live in Egypt, Syria, India, or Arabia, but what he is saying is that the idea of the Orient as a single, coherent, mysterious, backward, and exotic place, that idea was created by Europeans. It was created in books, in paintings, in travel accounts, in scholarly articles, and in government policies. And once created, this idea became more real to Europeans than the actual people and places it claimed to describe. Syed opens his book with a striking example. A French journalist visiting Beirut during the civil war of 1975-76 looked at the destroyed city center and said sadly that it had once seemed to belong to the Orient of the Chateaubriand and Nerval, two famous French writers who had traveled to the East in the 19th century. Notice what is happening here. The journalist is not mourning the loss of Lebanese homes, markets, or lives. He is mourning the loss of a European literary memory. The real people of Beirut who were suffering and dying barely matter in his reflection. What matters is a European image of the Orient. This, for Syed, is the essence of Orientalism. Syed gives three definitions of Orientalism. First, academic Orientalism. This is the simplest meaning. In universities, there are departments and professors who study the Orient. They teach Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Sanskrit, and Chinese. They write books on Islamic law, Persian poetry, or Indian religion. Anyone who does this kind of work is called an Orientalist. What they do is Orientalism. Syed does not attack these scholars personally. He acknowledges that many of them produced valuable, careful scholarship. But he asks, why does this field exist in this particular form? Why is there no Occidentalism to match it? The very name Orientalism already suggests that the West is the normal central place and the East is something special, different, and worth studying as an object. Second, general Orientalism. This is a broader meaning. Orientalism is a style of thought based on a very deep distinction between the Orient and the Occident, the West. Almost every European writer, from the ancient Greek playwright Aeschylus to the poet Victor Hugo, from the philosopher Marx to the novelist Flaubert, has accepted this basic division. They have written elaborate theories, poems, novels, and political essays about what the Orient is: despotic, sensual, irrational, unchanging, feminine, and mysterious. These ideas are so common that we hardly notice them, but they shape everything. Third, corporate Orientalism. This is the most important definition of Syed's theory. Orientalism is a corporate institution for dealing with the Orient. What does that mean? It means that Orientalism is not just a set of ideas floating in the air. It is embedded in real institutions like governments, colonial officers, universities, scholarly societies, publishing houses, and museums. It includes the work of diplomats, military officers, missionaries, and advisors. Orientalism is the Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. Syed makes a crucial point here. These three meanings are interdependent. The academic scholar, the romantic poet, and the colonial administrator all draw on the same basic assumptions. They all participate in the same system. the scholar's footnotes and the poet's images and the official's policies all reinforce each other. Sayed openly acknowledges his debt to the French philosopher Michel Foucault, especially Foucault's concept of discourse. What is a discourse? In simple terms, a discourse is a system of language and practice that produces what it claims only to describe. Let me explain with an example. A doctor does not just observe illness, the medical discourse defines what counts as an illness, what causes it, how to name it, and how to treat it. Before the medical discourse exists, the illness is not there in the same way. Similarly, Orientalism does not just describe a pre existing Orient, it produces the Orient as an object of knowledge, study, and rule. Syed writes, without examining Orientalism as a discourse, one cannot possibly understand the enormously systematic discipline by which European culture was able to manage and even produce the Orient politically, sociologically, militarily, ideologically, scientifically, and imaginatively. This is a radical claim. Syed is saying that the Orient, as Europeans know it, is a creation of Orientalist discourse. The real people of Cairo or Damascus may have their own lives, histories, and cultures. But when a European scholar writes about the Oriental mind or Islamic despotism, he is not describing those real people. He is producing a representation that fits into a pre existing system of knowledge. That system has its own rules, its own authorities, its own canon of texts, and its own standards for what counts as true. Once a discourse is established, it becomes self perpetuating. New scholars are trained in it. They read the classic works, they learn the proper questions to ask and the proper answers to give. They cite each other's work. Over time, the discourse becomes closed. It refers mostly to itself, not to the outside world. Syed calls this the textual attitude. Orientalism is not a conspiracy. No single person invented it. It is a structure that shapes what anyone can say, think, or write about the Orient. It imposes limits. It makes some statements seem natural and others impossible. Syed spends a good part of his introduction attacking a common belief that true knowledge is non political. Many humanists and scholars believe that if you study Shakespeare or ancient Greek poetry, you are doing pure scholarship. Whereas, if you study Soviet economics or Chinese politics, you are doing political knowledge. The first is supposedly neutral, the second is biased. Syed rejects this distinction completely. He argues that all knowledge is produced by human beings who live in specific historical circumstances. No scholar can detach himself from his class, his nationality, his beliefs, or his society. These things always shape what he studies and how he studies it. But here is the trick. The liberal consensus says that true knowledge is non-political. Therefore, if someone points out the politics of knowledge, they are accused of being ideological or biased. This allows the dominant system, the one that pretends to be neutral and to remain unchallenged. Now apply this to Orientalism. When a British scholar writes about Egypt in the 19th century, he does not write as a neutral observer. He writes as a British citizen. Britain occupied Egypt in 1882. It ruled Egypt as a colony. The scholar's work is shaped by the fact whether he admits it or not. He may believe he is simply describing the Egyptian character, but his descriptions, lazy, dishonest, childlike, irrational, serve the interests of colonial rule. They justify the British presence, and because he presents them as scientific facts, not political opinions, they are very hard to challenge. Syed puts it bluntly. To be a European or an American in such a situation is by no means an inert fact. It meant and means being aware, however dimly, that one belongs to a power with definite interests in the Orient. This awareness does not have to be conscious or conspiratorial. It is simply the air that the scholar breathes. This brings us to the relationship between knowledge and power. Syed draws on a long tradition here, from Bacon in the 17th century to Michel Foucault in the 20th. The basic idea is simple. Knowledge is not the opposite of power, it is a form of power. Let me give you the clearest example from the book. In 1910, Arthur Balfour, the former British Prime Minister, gave a speech in the House of Commons defending British rule in Egypt. Someone challenged him. What right do you have to take up these airs of superiority with regard to people whom you choose to call Oriental? Balfour's answer is fascinating. He does not say we are stronger than them. He does not say we conquered them in war. Instead, he says we know the civilization of Egypt better than we know the civilization of any other country. We know it further back. We know it more intimately. We know more about it. Do you see what Balfour is doing? He is claiming that knowledge justifies rule. Because the British know Egypt, they have the right to govern it. And because they govern it, they know it even better. Knowledge and power feed each other in an endless loop. Syed's point is that this is not just a cynical excuse. Balfour genuinely believed what he was saying. He was drawing on a century of Orientalist scholarship. Books, grammars, histories, translations. They had produced a detailed picture of Egypt as a place incapable of self-government. For Balfour, that picture was reality. His power as a colonial ruler was simply the natural consequence of his superior knowledge. This is the core of theoretical insight of Orientalism. The relationship between the West and the Orient is a relationship of power, of domination, of varying degrees of complex hegemony, and that relationship is mediated by knowledge. The West knows the Orient, and therefore the West rules the Orient. Now we need to understand how knowledge is produced in Orientalism. Syed introduces a very useful concept, the textual attitude. The textual attitude means relying on books and texts rather than on direct lived experience. When a European traveler goes to the Orient, he does not see it with fresh eyes. He sees it through the lens of what he has read. He has read Homer, Herodotus, the Bible, Dante, Chateaubriand. He has read the latest scholarly monographs. He expects to find what the books have told him he will find. If reality does not match the books, the traveler is disappointed. Not because reality is wrong, but because the books were supposed to be right. Syed quotes the French writer Nerval, who traveled to Egypt and wrote sadly, "I have already lost kingdom after kingdom, province after province, the more beautiful half of the universe." He was not mourning the loss of real things, he was mourning the loss of his imaginary Orient, which the real Orient had destroyed. The textual attitude has a powerful effect. It makes the text more real than the reality. Over time, Orientalist texts accumulate, they cite each other, they become an archive. New writers draw on old writers. Eventually, the entire archive forms a closed system. You no longer need to go to Egypt to know Egypt. You can stay in London or Paris and read about it. And what you read will be accepted as true because it comes from an authoritative source. Syed gives the example of Edward Lane, the author of an account of the manners and customs of the modern Egyptians, published in 1836. Lane lived in Egypt for several years. He learned Arabic. He dressed like an Egyptian. But he never fully participated in Egyptian life. He remained a detached observer. And when he wrote his book, he organized it not as a story of his own experiences, but as an encyclopedia, a collection of facts, types, and categories. His book became the standard reference. Later travelers like Flaubert and Nerval read Lane before they went to Egypt. They saw Egypt through Lane's eyes. The text mediated their experience. This is the textual attitude. The book creates the reality, and then the reality is measured against the book. The Orient becomes a textual universe, not a living one. One of Syed's most useful distinction is between latent and manifest Orientalism. This distinction helps explain how Orientalism can change on the surface while remaining the same deep down. Latent Orientalism is the deep, unconscious, stable structure of assumptions about the Orient. These assumptions are rarely stated directly because they are taken for granted. They include ideas like the Orient is irrational, despotic, sensual, feminine, childlike, unchanging, and backward. Latent Orientalism is like the grammar of a language. It is the underlying system that generates all the specific statements. Manifest Orientalism is the surface level, the changing, visible statements that different writers make. These include scholarly debates, political arguments, travel observations, and literary descriptions. Manifest Orientalism varies from author to author and from period to period. One scholar may praise Islamic art while another condemns Islamic law. One poet may celebrate the exotic beauty of the harem while another fears the fanaticism of the mob. But beneath these surface differences, latent Orientalism remains constant. No matter how much they disagree, all Orientalists share the same basic framework. They all accept that the Orient is fundamentally different from the West. They all accept that this difference can be known and described. They all accept that the Western scholar has the authority to speak for the Orient. This is why Orientalism is so durable. It does not depend on any single claim being true. If one claim is disproved, another can take its place. The deep structure remains intact. Syed writes, whatever change occurs in knowledge of the Orient is found almost exclusively in manifest Orientalism. The unanimity, stability, durability of latent Orientalism are more or less constant. Let me give a contemporary example. In the 19th century, Orientalists argued that the Orient was racially inferior. Today, most scholars reject open racism, but they still argue that the Orient is culturally different or psychologically different or politically different. The content has changed, but the structure, the division between us and them remains the same. That is latent Orientalism at work. Let me bring together the main threads of this lecture. First, Orientalism is not just a collection of biased books. It is a discourse, a system of language, institutions, practices that produces the Orient as an object of knowledge and rule. Second, Orientalism rejects the idea of pure knowledge. All knowledge is produced by human beings embedded in history, society, and power. The Western scholar who studies the Orient is always also a representative of Western power. Third, knowledge and power are not opposites. In Orientalism, knowledge is power. To know the Orient is to have authority over it. To have authority is to know it even better. Fourth, Orientalism relies on a textual attitude. It prefers books to lived experience. It builds a close archive of texts that refer to each other, not to reality. It trains generations of scholars to see what the books have told them to see. Fifth, Orientalism has a deep structure, latent, and a surface level, manifest. The deep structure, the assumption that Orient and Occident are radically different, remains constant. Only the surface claims change. Orientalism is not about individual prejudice or bad intentions. It is about a system that shapes what can be said, thought, and done. No single Orientalist is to blame. They are all caught in a structure that precedes them and outlaws them. Critique must therefore target the structure, not just the individual.